I sit at a round table that feels like an afterthought, pushed so far against the wall it might as well be in the hallway. The chandeliers above throw golden light across the ballroom, but here in my corner it only flickers dimly, as if even the electricity knows I don't belong. This is my sister Caroline's wedding, Savannah's grand social event of the year, and every detail has been planned to perfection. Every detail except me. My table has no centerpiece, no crystal goblet, no name card, just a chipped plate holding one dry roll of bread. That is all they think I deserve. I stare at the bread, my stomach tight but not with hunger. Around me, the other tables glisten with silverware and champagne flutes, laughter bubbling as if rehearsed. Then I feel a shadow. My mother, Vivienne, glides past in her silver satin gown, pearls gleaming at her throat. She doesn't stop to sit. She leans just close enough to poison me with her voice. "This suits you," she whispers, as if the stale bread were a deliberate joke. Her perfume is sharp, expensive, suffocating. Before I can respond, she is gone again, floating toward the head table like a queen surveying her kingdom. Moments later, Caroline herself drifts by in her gown, a dress so covered in lace it looks like it was spun from frost. The guests gasp as though they've never seen a bride before, as though she invented beauty. She doesn't pause when her eyes pass over me. She only dips her chin slightly, lips curling into a delicate smile. "Pathetic," she murmurs, the words sliding from her tongue like a blessing. Then she turns back to her admirers, radiant and adored. I press my palms against my knees, steadying myself. I could leave right now, disappear into the bathroom, cry into a handful of tissues, play the role they've written for me. I know that part well, the invisible sister, the overlooked daughter, the shadow. But tonight feels different. Something presses against my ribs, something sharp and long buried. For the first time, I realize I have a choice. The quartet swells at the far end of the room, violins rising like they're carrying Caroline's triumph on their strings. Guests clink glasses. Waiters circle with trays of champagne that never make it to my corner. And still, the bread sits before me, dry and empty. My mother thinks she has put me in my place. My sister thinks she has won the game. They believe I'll stay quiet, because I always have, but they don't know what I've brought with me tonight. I lean back, my hand brushing against the small purse in my lap. Inside, my phone rests against the lining. That phone holds more power than all the chandeliers, more truth than every smiling toast. Because waiting on it is something I've kept hidden for weeks, something I've been too afraid to use until now. The ballroom is a stage, and they've written me out of the play. But tonight, silence will not protect them. Tonight, silence is mine to break. I lean further back in my chair, my hands folded neatly in my lap as if I am just another quiet guest. No one notices me, not really, and that is exactly how they want it. The Kane family has always treated me like a shadow, tolerated but never welcomed. Tonight is only the latest reminder, the crowning jewel in years of polished cruelty. My father, Richard, sits near the front with his chin lifted and his posture straight, a man who prefers contracts and investment portfolios to the messiness of his daughters. He will not look in my direction once this evening. He rarely ever does. Beside him, Vivienne glitters, sipping champagne that catches the light like liquid diamonds. She laughs easily at every flattering remark, her eyes sliding over me as though I were a stranger who wandered in uninvited. And then there is Caroline, the bride, basking in every ounce of admiration. She shines so brightly that people squint when she walks past, and she believes the glow is her own making, not the careful stage lights hung above her. Everyone here is either praising her beauty, her future, or the union she has secured. Not one person asks where her sister is seated. Not one person wonders why I sit beside a fire exit with nothing but stale bread. My fingers brush against the purse in my lap again, confirming the small weight inside. My phone rests there, cool and silent, carrying within it the truth they could never imagine me brave enough to reveal. Weeks ago, I had stumbled upon Caroline's secret, a truth so sharp it cut through every illusion she had worked so hard to build. It was at her engagement party, a night meant to show the world her perfect match with James Whitlock, a man groomed from birth to belong to families like ours. She had begged me to bring my camera, just for a few candid shots, she'd said, pretending it was an honor. I knew it was a command dressed as kindness, but I went anyway. I stayed in the corners, as I always do, lens in hand, invisible behind glassware and flowers. That is where I caught her alone in the underground garage, slipping into the arms of Ethan Cross, one of James's own business partners. Their kiss was not quick or nervous. It was practiced, familiar, intimate. I had not meant to press record, but my hands moved before my mind did. The camera caught it all. The way she held him, the way she laughed, the way betrayal seemed ordinary. I carried that recording home like a secret weapon I did not yet know how to wield. As if fate were not finished with me, another truth soon followed. Days later, I stopped by my parents' home. I meant only to speak briefly with my father, but instead I heard voices drifting from the sunroom. My mother and Caroline, their tones low and certain. They spoke of shifting property, moving shares, ensuring every piece of the Kane estate would land in Caroline's hands. They spoke of me as though I were an inconvenience they would soon discard. "She's just background," my mother said. "A phase." Caroline laughed and agreed, promising that once the wedding was over, I would fade for good. I recorded that conversation too, my hand trembling only slightly as I pressed the button on my phone. That was the moment I stopped doubting. That was the moment I knew silence would destroy me faster than their words ever could. For nights, I kept both recordings hidden, turning them over in my mind, wondering if I had the strength to use them. But bravery doesn't matter when survival is at stake. So last night, I made a choice. I edited the clips together, paired their betrayal with their laughter, and uploaded it not to a private folder, not to a USB drive, but to the one place they could never erase it from: YouTube. I titled it "The Truth Behind the Kane Wedding" and set it to premiere during tonight's reception. Not just for these polished guests, but for anyone in the world who has ever been silenced, erased, or fed dry bread at a table meant to shame them. Now I sit in my corner, the orchestra swelling, the bride basking, the mother glowing, and the phones in this room ready to light up at any second. They have no idea what is coming, but I do. And for once, I am not the one unprepared. I grew up in the shadow of this family, and shadows do not leave marks on photographs. That is why so few pictures of me exist in the Kane albums, tucked away in drawers of polished mahogany inside our Savannah home. Caroline's smile is everywhere: pageant crowns, ballet recitals, college formals, magazine clippings. I appear rarely, and when I do, it is usually blurred at the edge, holding someone's coat, or standing half-turned as if I wandered into the frame by mistake. My mother used to call Caroline her sunbeam and me her quiet one, though the word never carried affection. Quiet was her polite way of saying unnecessary. At 10 years old, I learned that lesson clearly. Vivienne had promised me a birthday picnic in Forsyth Park, told me to wait by the swings with cupcakes and paper hats. I sat for over an hour, watching families spread blankets and blow out candles that weren't mine, before realizing she had taken Caroline to a modeling audition instead. I walked home alone on the city bus, the cupcakes untouched in my lap, their frosting sliding into the plastic lid. That was the first time I understood that I wasn't forgotten by accident. I was forgotten because I didn't matter. It didn't end with childhood. Years later, on the day of my high school graduation, I searched the bleachers for a familiar face as other families cheered and waved flowers. No one was there for me. After the ceremony, as students hugged and posed for pictures, I stood by the curb until a friend's father offered me a ride home. That night, when I asked where my parents had been, Vivienne answered without shame, "We thought it was tomorrow." As if that explained everything, as if her lie could cover the hollow pit inside me. Richard said nothing, his eyes already on the evening news. Silence has always been his preferred language. The pattern never changed. Holidays came with gifts, wrapped in silver bows for Caroline, while I received whatever could be excused as practical. A sweater, a pair of socks. Once, a planner engraved with my initials, a reminder to organize myself better. The message was always the same. Caroline was legacy, I was obligation. I learned to fade into the background, to turn my energy toward the only thing that gave me dignity: my work behind a camera. Where Caroline craved lenses pointed at her, I learned to look through one, to capture the details people ignored. The calloused hand of a waitress holding a coffee mug, the laugh of children in worn sneakers, the quiet face of an elderly man staring out a window. My art wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. It gave me proof that truth mattered, even if my family insisted otherwise. As I grew older, silence became my shield. I stopped trying to compete with Caroline's sparkle and Vivienne's sharp tongue. I told myself that solitude was safer than rejection, that living alone in my modest apartment in Asheville was enough. And for a time, it was. But the truth is that every slight, Every absence, every whispered insult stacked like bricks inside me. I thought I could build a wall from them, something that would protect me from caring. But walls are heavy, and eventually, they crumble. By the time Caroline's wedding invitation arrived, written in gold script with no note, no warmth, and no acknowledgement of sisterhood, I already knew what it meant. I was still not part of this family, I never had been. Yet, when I stared at the envelope, at its perfect edges and perfumed seal, something stirred in me that I hadn't felt in years. Not anger exactly, and not hope. It was something quieter, something deeper. The realization that I could still choose how this story ended. For once, I didn't have to stay silent. When the invitation first arrived, I almost threw it away. Heavy cardstock, gold lettering, embossed initials, it was less a welcome and more a summons. Addressed coldly to Ms. Marissa Kane. No, sister, no note, no warmth. Just proof that my absence would be noticed, and that would inconvenience them. Soon after, Vivian called. Her voice was clipped as ever. I assume you received the invitation. I said yes. Then please, dress appropriately this time. No denim. The Whitlocks are not people we can afford to offend. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't congratulate me on anything. Just instructions, as if I were a hired hand. Caroline texted later, her tone breezy, fake friendly. So excited you're coming. Quick favor, could you bring your camera and snap a few pics during the reception? Nothing fancy, just candid shots. Free, of course, haha. The word free landed like a slap. She wanted me not as a guest, but as cheap labor. For a moment, I thought about refusing outright, but I knew how that would go, Vivian calling me selfish, reminding me that Caroline always includes me. It would spiral into another lecture about how I never do enough for family, so I replied simply, I'd like to attend as a guest this time. Caroline never answered. I left my phone on the counter after that, staring at the invitation. It didn't matter how they dressed it up with gold foil and elegant script. To me, it was the same message I had always received. You're not really one of us, but your silence is useful. I decided then that if I went, I would not go as background. I would go with my eyes open, and with the truth in my hands. The day of the engagement party came draped in Charleston's coastal glow, all glass towers reflecting the harbor and rooftop terraces filled with the hum of privilege. Caroline had insisted I bring my camera, and though I told myself I would leave it in the car, habit made me sling it over my shoulder. My role, after all, was always to observe, to hover at the edges where no one bothered to look. The party unfolded like a magazine spread champagne pyramids, men in tailored suits, women in gowns that shimmered like waves. I drifted through the room, capturing moments no one else noticed. Children hiding beneath linen-draped tables, a woman's bored yawn behind her jeweled hand, the way Caroline's smile stiffened when she thought no one was watching. Toward the end of the night, fireworks lured the guests onto the terrace. Laughter and clinking glasses floated through the open doors. I stayed behind, fiddling with camera settings, grateful for the emptiness. That's when I saw her, Caroline, standing near the bar with her phone lit up against her face. Her expression was sharp, focused, nothing like the gentle bride-to-be she had shown the crowd. She typed quickly, then paused, her lips twitching into a sly smile. From where I stood, hidden behind a column, I raised my camera out of instinct. Through the lens, I caught a single line glowing across her screen. Tonight, one last time, my bed, not James's. My breath caught, but my hands moved before I thought. The shutter clicked, the camera recording video now, and when Caroline slipped her phone away and headed for the private elevator, I followed at a distance. She didn't look back once. I took the stairs down to the garage, heart hammering, and slipped into the shadows near the far wall. Minutes later, a sleek black SUV pulled up beside her silver coupe. Out stepped Ethan Cross, James's business associate, the same man I'd seen once at a charity dinner. Caroline ran straight into his arms. The kiss was long, deliberate, familiar, not a thrill of secrecy routine. I kept the camera steady. The lens didn't shake, though my hands wanted to. They spoke briefly, Caroline laughing softly, brushing at his coat, and then disappeared into the back seat of her car. The door shut, muffling them, but I didn't need sound. The video told the story clearly enough. After a long moment, I lowered the camera and turned away. I didn't know yet what I would do with what I had captured. But deep down, something inside me already knew the truth. This was no accident. This was the beginning of their end. A week later, I found myself back at my parents' house, the familiar scent of polished wood and lavender oil pressing down on me like a memory I couldn't shake. I had told myself I was only stopping by to see my father, maybe to speak to him quietly, to see if there was any part of him left that might still recognize me as his daughter. But as soon as I stepped through the side door, I heard voices drifting from the sunroom. My mother's tone was calm and precise, the same voice she used when negotiating favors at charity events. Caroline's voice followed, lower but equally sharp. I froze in the hallway, holding my breath, listening. "Don't worry," Vivienne said smoothly. "I've already moved the beach house, the vineyard condo, and the legacy shares into your name. Richard has no idea." "Good," Caroline replied. "After the wedding, I want things in motion fast. We can't afford for him to start poking around." "He won't," Vivienne said. "That man hasn't read a financial document in 5 years. He still thinks our lawyer manages everything." There was the faint clink of a teacup on porcelain. Then Caroline's voice again, softer but laced with certainty. "This is for us, Mom, for the women of this family. After I'm married, I'll hold the pen, the accounts, the estate, the trust, everything. I'll make sure you're set. No more pretending with Dad." "And Marissa?" Vivienne asked, as if saying my name were an inconvenience. Caroline gave a low laugh. "She's nothing. Wallpaper. After the wedding, we cut the polite act. No more invitations, no more holidays. She'll fade." My hands tightened around the strap of my bag, nails digging into the leather. I should have left, but instead I pulled out my phone, opened the recorder, and pressed the red button. Their voices filled the device, every word another stone on my chest. "She's so naive," Vivienne added, her voice dripping with disdain. "She still thinks honesty means something. Poor thing probably believes love and hard work are enough." They both laughed, sharp and certain. The sound cut through me more deeply than any insult. It wasn't just cruelty anymore, it was strategy, deliberate and cold. They weren't just ignoring me, they were planning to erase me. I slipped back toward the side door, careful not to let the floorboards creak. My phone trembled in my hand, the recording clock ticking upward. 1 minute, 2, 3. I didn't need more. I had what I came for, even if I hadn't known it when I walked in. This wasn't just about Caroline's affair anymore. This was about theft, betrayal, and legacy. It wasn't jealousy I felt, or even anger. It was clarity. I had been their ghost for decades, but now I held proof that I was real, proof they could never laugh away. I drove home that night in silence, the recording still open on my phone, the numbers frozen on the screen. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than necessary, the Savannah streets blurring past, but my mind replayed every word I'd just heard. Wallpaper, fade, poor thing. Their voices layered over each other like a cruel symphony, designed to crush whatever scraps of belonging I still carried. For years, I had told myself that their rejection was careless, that maybe I was simply overlooked, but now I knew better. It wasn't carelessness, it was intent. They had carved me out of the picture on purpose, because I didn't fit the family portrait they wanted the world to see. I parked outside my apartment and sat for a long time in the car, staring at the glow of my phone. The 2 files, the video of Caroline in the garage and the recording from the sunroom, felt heavier than anything I had ever held. They weren't just clips, they were proof. Proof of betrayal, proof of greed, proof that I had been right to feel the chill of exclusion all along. For once, it wasn't just in my head, it was real, and I had caught it. At first, I thought about keeping them tucked away, hidden on a drive like old photographs no one would ever see. After all, what would exposing them really do? Could it undo the years of being erased? Could it fill the empty seat at my graduation, or bring back the birthday picnic I never had? Probably not. But as I sat there in the dark, the weight of my family's cruelty pressing against my chest, I realized something. Silence had never protected me. Silence had only given them room to keep building their empire of lies. If I stayed quiet again, I would be giving them permission to finish erasing me. So I turned on my computer. I watched the clips again, my stomach tightening with each frame, but I didn't look away. Caroline's text on her phone, her kiss with Ethan, my mother's steady voice promising to transfer properties, Caroline laughing about my disappearance. Their words cut deep, but they also gave me strength. For the first time in my life, the truth was in my hands, and I wasn't going to let it rot in silence. I opened YouTube. My fingers hovered over the upload button. This wasn't going to be some private confrontation in a living room or a whisper at the wedding table. If I was going to speak, I would speak loudly enough that they could never bury me again. I named the video "The Truth Behind the Kane Wedding." I didn't dress it up, didn't add commentary or flashy edits. Just the raw clips, back to back, unflinching and undeniable. Then I set the premiere time. Not now, not tomorrow, but the exact moment Caroline would be cutting her cake, when every guest would have their phones out, cameras rolling, the air buzzing with attention. When I finally closed the laptop, my chest felt lighter, as if the bricks I had carried for decades had begun to shift. I didn't know what the fallout would be, but I knew one thing clearly. Tomorrow, when the lights dimmed and the champagne flowed, the silence would end. The Bayfield Hotel stood like a palace in the middle of Savannah, its marble pillars washed in golden light, every inch of it built to impress. Guests in tuxedos and glittering gowns flooded the entrance, their laughter bouncing off the stone as though it belonged to them. I stepped out of the hired car, my emerald dress plain but deliberate. It wasn't meant to dazzle, it was meant to remind me of who I was, steady, sharp, present. I kept my chin level as I walked through the revolving doors, the air inside thick with perfume and money. Nobody looked twice at me, that was how it had always been. A woman with a headset and clipboard led me away from the grand lobby. I followed without question, but with every step my stomach sank. She didn't take me to the glowing ballroom with its silk-draped tables and crystal chandeliers. She led me through a narrow side hall, past the clink of glassware and the swell of the quartet. When she stopped, I already knew what I would find. A single round table tucked near the emergency exit. No candles, no silver, no centerpiece. Just a porcelain plate and a stale piece of bread. A name card sat in front of it in looping script. Ms. Marissa, Kane. I lowered myself into the chair, my dress catching awkwardly on the leg, and stared at the bread. My throat tightened, not from humiliation but from the weight of recognition. This was the pattern, polished into perfection. They wanted me to know my place. Vivienne appeared soon after, a shimmer of pearls and satin. Her smile looked like grace from afar, but up close it was sharpened to cut. She leaned down just enough for her voice to reach only me. "I see you found your seat," she said softly. Her eyes flicked to the plate. Simple, humble, fitting. She straightened before I could respond and glided away, her heels clicking like punctuation on her cruelty. Caroline arrived not long after, her gown sweeping the carpet, her veil sparkling in the chandelier light. She paused when she saw me, tilting her head as though inspecting an exhibit. Her lips curled into the same delicate smile she had worn her whole life, the one that disguised venom as charm. "Minimalist dress," she murmured, lowering her voice. "Very affordable. You've always had a gift for making ordinary things look cheaper." She laughed lightly, a sound rehearsed for ballrooms. Then, without waiting for an answer, she drifted back to her admirers, leaving only the echo of her insult. I looked again at the bread. I didn't touch it. Instead, my fingers slipped into my purse, brushing against my phone. I could feel the weight of what I had scheduled pulsing like a heartbeat. They thought this seat would silence me. They thought dry bread and mockery could keep me small. But what they didn't know was that the moment their champagne toasts began, the world would hear every secret they had worked so hard to hide. The orchestra swelled as the guests took their seats, silverware chiming against porcelain, the air heavy with anticipation. At the front of the ballroom, James Whitlock raised his glass, his smile flawless, rehearsed. He thanked his parents, praised Caroline, and spoke about legacy with the confidence of a man who believed the future was already secured. Laughter and applause rolled through the room like a tide. From my corner, I sat still, the glow of my phone tucked safely away in my purse. I wasn't waiting for food. I was waiting for the moment. The servers moved in careful rhythm, topping off champagne flutes, clearing plates of lobster and filet that had never reached my table. The spotlight shifted to Caroline, who stood, radiant and smug, her hand resting lightly on James's arm. "To family," she declared, her voice carrying like it had been trained for a stage. Guests clapped, some rising from their seats, all eager to prove they belonged in this circle. My mother beamed, her pearls gleaming, convinced she had orchestrated another flawless victory. And then it started. At first, it was only a murmur at one of the back tables, a few heads bent over glowing phone screens. Someone whispered, someone gasped, and then the ripple spread. More phones lit up, blue-white light shining against tuxedos and gowns. Brows furrowed, mouths fell open. Across the ballroom, the whispers turned sharp. Caroline's name hissed in tones not meant for her ears. I watched it unfold like a slow wave rolling across the ocean. Caroline noticed the shift first. Her smile faltered, her eyes darting from guest to guest. "What is it?" she asked, laughing lightly, pretending to be in on the joke. But the joke was on her. Vivienne's jaw tightened, the pearls at her throat suddenly looking like shackles. James frowned, pulling out his own phone as the crowd hushed. The silence broke with one woman's gasp, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh my God." The video was live. My video. The truth behind the Kane wedding. Uploaded, scheduled, unleashed. On every screen in the room, Caroline's secret flickered into view. Her text message, her kiss with Ethan in the garage, her laughter muffled behind car windows. Gasps filled the air like fire catching dry grass. Then came the recording, Vivienne's voice, calm and cruel, promising to move houses and accounts, Caroline laughing about erasing me completely. The ballroom was no longer a celebration. It was a courtroom, and I was no longer their shadow. I was the witness they had never expected to speak. Panic spread faster than the whispers. Caroline's face drained of color, her hand tightening on James's sleeve as though she could anchor herself against the truth unraveling around her. "It's fake," she stammered, her voice pitched too high. "It's doctored. Someone's trying to sabotage us." But the evidence glowed in every hand, undeniable. Ethan's face clear, her voice distinct, my mother's clipped tone unmistakable. Denial couldn't erase the pixels or mute the laughter that echoed through the speakers of 100 phones. James stood frozen, his glass still in his hand, his knuckles whitening around the stem. The man who had spent months planning a perfect union now watched it crumble in seconds. His parents, seated at the head table, exchanged grim looks that said more than any words could. The Whitlocks were a family of legacy and control, and nothing enraged them more than scandal. Vivienne leaned toward Caroline, whispering furiously, her mask of poise slipping for the first time. From my seat by the fire exit, I could see the fury in her eyes as she realized the spectacle she had curated was slipping out of her grasp. The guests didn't look at the bride anymore. They looked at their phones, or at each other, murmuring, judging, calculating how quickly they could distance themselves from this disaster. A man near the back muttered, "Unbelievable," while another shook his head, whispering to his wife, "No wonder Marissa was tucked away." The truth was spreading not just across the room, but beyond it, out into the world, into the feeds and comment sections, into the relentless archive of the internet. This wasn't a rumor to be dismissed. It was a record, permanent and public. Caroline's mask cracked completely. She slammed her hand on the table, knocking over a champagne flute, her voice rising above the murmurs. "Turn it off. Everyone turn it off. This is private." But even as she shouted, the words played on, her own laughter slicing through the silence, her mother's plotting laid bare. Every denial only made her look smaller, weaker, cornered. James finally set his glass down. He reached slowly for the platinum band on his finger, twisting it once before sliding it free. He stared at it as though seeing it for the first time, then placed it carefully on the linen tablecloth. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet but carried across the hushed ballroom. "I loved a lie," he said. "A lie in a white dress." Then he turned his back on Caroline, on my mother, and walked toward the doors without another word. The room erupted not in applause, not in sympathy, but in the raw sound of collapse. Guests rose, gathering coats and purses, eager to escape the fallout. Conversations hissed like wind in dry leaves. "She ruined herself," someone whispered. "That poor man," another said. No one came to Caroline's defense. No one soothed Vivienne's rage. The Kane name, once polished like silver, now lay tarnished in full view of everyone. From my seat by the fire exit, I did not move. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than any toast, my presence sharper than any speech. They had tried to erase me, to starve me into invisibility with dry bread and mockery. But it was their hunger for power, their arrogance, that left them starving now. Vivienne snapped. Her chair screeched against the marble as she stood, her voice cutting across the room, raw and uncontrolled. "This is your fault," she screamed, her perfectly manicured finger stabbing the air in my direction. "You orchestrated this circus. You destroyed everything we built." Her pearls trembled at her throat, no longer symbols of elegance but chains rattling with rage. The few remaining guests turned to look at me, but their eyes weren't condemning. They were curious, some even sympathetic, because by now they had seen the video, and they knew the words were real. Caroline slumped in her chair, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her hands covering her face as if she could hide from the wreckage. The lace of her gown looked heavy now, not radiant but suffocating. She mumbled denials into her palms, but no one leaned close enough to listen. She was no longer the glittering bride, she was the punchline of her own performance. James's parents, the Whitlocks, remained upright and cold, their power visible even in silence. Finally, Douglas Whitlock rose, his expression carved from stone. "This marriage," he said, voice steady and loud enough to silence even Vivienne, "was meant to be more than personal. It was a union of families, a merging of legacy. But deceit is not a value we do business with." His eyes locked on Vivienne, then slid to Caroline, whose sobs only grew louder. "As of this moment, the Whitlock family withdraws from all negotiations with the Kanes. Any pending partnerships are null and void." The words were a blade sharper than anything I had prepared. Deals worth millions, gone with a single statement. Gasps rippled across the room, the kind of reaction moneyed guests can't hide when fortunes collapse before their eyes. My mother opened her mouth to protest, but Douglas cut her off with a flick of his hand. "We do not tolerate lies." The ballroom's silence deepened, broken only by the rustle of gowns and the scrape of chairs as guests hurried to leave. Some shot glances at me as they passed, nodding subtly, as if to say they finally saw what had been hidden for so long. One woman whispered to her husband, "No wonder she was pushed aside." Another muttered, "I had no idea they were like that." Their pity wasn't what I wanted, but it was proof that the story wasn't mine alone anymore. Vivienne tried once more, her voice shrill now, stripped of refinement. "Do you know who we are?" she shrieked, her face red with fury. "We are the Kanes. This isn't over." But her words rang hollow. No one was listening anymore. The orchestra had stopped playing long ago, and the only music left was the echo of her desperation. I stayed seated at my lonely table, my bread untouched, my hands resting calmly in my lap. I hadn't needed to stand, hadn't needed to shout. All I had done was press upload, and that was enough. The ballroom emptied quickly, leaving behind only the clatter of servers collecting half-finished glasses and slices of untouched cake. White roses drooped in their vases, the scent of candle wax lingering like smoke after a fire. My mother had vanished into a corner, her fury spent, her voice gone hoarse. Caroline was nowhere to be seen, carried out by her bridesmaids who could no longer meet her eyes. And my father, Richard, sat alone at the head table, his tie loosened, staring at nothing. He hadn't spoken a word since the video began, hadn't moved even when the Whitlocks announced the collapse of every deal he had banked his pride on. He just sat, stunned, realizing too late that the empire he thought he commanded had been built on sand. I didn't move either. I stayed by my table at the exit, the chair uncomfortable, my purse still in my lap, but I felt lighter than I had in years. For once, I hadn't run. For once, I hadn't swallowed the insult and smiled through it. I had spoken, not with words, but with proof, and proof carried further than any toast ever could. The servers glanced at me as they worked, uncertain if I was a guest or just someone forgotten in the chaos. Maybe I was both. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that when the truth came out, no one could erase me. Not Caroline, not Vivienne, not even the silence of Richard Kane. I finally rose, smoothing my dress, and walked toward the back doors. The hallways were quieter now, the polished floors echoing under my heels. When I stepped outside into the night air, Savannah felt different, sharper, freer, as though the city itself had been waiting for me to breathe. The world knew now. The Kane name was broken, the lies shattered, and the silence I had carried for decades no longer belonged to me, it belonged to them. The days after the wedding moved like a storm that refused to pass. The Kane name, once polished and untouchable in Savannah, became a whisper people spat out behind closed doors. Newspapers wrote cautiously worded stories about the scandal at the Bayfield Hotel. Blogs were less careful, bride exposed cheating during wedding reception. Social media was ruthless, sharing clips from my YouTube video until even strangers in other states knew the story. My face wasn't on camera, but people knew. They always do. Some applauded me, calling me brave for speaking out. Others sneered, accusing me of being vindictive. For once, I didn't care, because whether they praised me or condemned me, they were talking about me, not ignoring me. Vivienne's fall was sharp and public. Invitations stopped arriving. Boards she had sat on quietly asked for her resignation. The women she had called friends suddenly stopped answering her calls. Even her weekly hair appointment was canceled, the salon overbooked indefinitely. She stayed inside after that, curtains drawn, phone silent. For someone who built her identity on appearances, disappearing was the worst punishment of all. Caroline's collapse was even harsher. The modeling agencies stopped calling. The jewelry company, she was the face of cut ties within days. She tried posting glamorous photos online, pretending nothing had changed, but the comments gutted her endless strings of laughing emojis. Reminders of Ethan's name, questions about her betrayal. James never spoke to her again, and his family issued a public statement clarifying they had no connection to her or the Kanes. And when Caroline checked her private savings account, the one she had secretly started with Ethan in case she needed a way out, she found it empty. He had taken everything and vanished. She had played everyone her fiancé, her family, even me, but in the end, she had been played too. Richard bore the collapse in silence. Business deals evaporated overnight. Old partners cited instability in leadership. Investors backed away. He never raged, never shouted. He just seemed to shrink in his chair at the dining room table, his tie always loosened, his eyes always distant. The man who had once been untouchable was finally touched by the reality he had ignored for decades. I watched it all from the quiet of my apartment, the notifications on my video climbing higher each day. What I had uploaded wasn't just a scandal, it was a mirror, and in it, the world finally saw what I had lived with all my life. Weeks passed, and the noise began to settle. The headlines moved on, the gossip quieted, but the echo of what I had done lingered. That's when I received an email I never expected. Sylvia Harper, a curator from a respected gallery in Atlanta, wrote to me directly. She had seen my video not for the scandal, she explained, but for the rawness of it. She had looked deeper and found my photography online, the small portfolio I had almost been ashamed to post. "Your eye," she wrote, "doesn't look away. That's rare. I want to show your work." At first I thought it was a mistake. I reread the message half a dozen times, convinced she meant it for someone else. But then a second email arrived with details, a proposal for a solo exhibition, a collection centered not on perfection, but on truth. She wanted the photographs I had hidden in boxes for years. The old woman staring out a bus window, the child laughing in muddy shoes, the quiet corners of life no one else noticed. For the first time, someone saw me not as background, not as an afterthought, but as an artist. I said yes. Preparing for that exhibition gave me a focus I had never felt before. My apartment became a studio, prints drying across every surface, light spilling through windows I no longer kept shuttered. Each image felt heavier, more important, because I knew this time they wouldn't be hidden. They would be on walls, under lights, in front of people who wanted to see them. On the night of the opening, I stood quietly in the corner of the gallery, watching strangers linger in front of my photographs. They tilted their heads, leaned closer, whispered softly to each other. No one knew my family's name here. No one cared about Caroline's collapse or Vivian's exile. They were here for my work for me. Sylvia found me near the end of the night, her smile warm, her words simple. "This is only the beginning." And for the first time, I believed her. Rain fell steady the evening she returned. A knock rattled my studio door, soft but hesitant, the kind of sound someone makes when they're not sure they belong. I set down my camera and wiped my hands, expecting a delivery, maybe a student from the community class I had started teaching on Saturdays. But when I opened the door, there she was, Caroline. Her hair clung wet to her face, her designer coat soaked through, heavy on her shoulders. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, mascara smudged into gray shadows beneath her eyes. She didn't speak at first. She just stood there in the rain, her hands at her sides, raindrops sliding down her cheeks like tears. Finally, her voice cracked through the silence. I didn't know where else to go. The words carried none of the practiced poise she'd built her life on. No performance, no charm, just exhaustion. I didn't step aside. I kept my hand on the edge of the door, holding the gap between us like a line I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. "Why now?" I asked, my voice even. She swallowed, her lips trembling as she searched for an answer. "Because I have nothing left to lie for." Her eyes lifted to meet mine, and for once they weren't sharp or mocking. They were stripped bare, emptied of the arrogance that had defined her. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she rushed on, her tone raw. I need to work, to do something real. I can clean, run errands, whatever. You don't even have to look at me." For a long moment, I said nothing. I thought of the years of silence, the birthdays forgotten, the insults disguised as jokes, the seat by the exit with the dry bread. I thought of the video, of her laughter in the garage, of her voice in the sunroom plotting to erase me. Forgiveness was far away, maybe unreachable, but consequences had already come for her, and standing in my doorway, I saw them written across her face. I stepped back, just enough to let her enter. She slipped past me, dripping water onto the wooden floor, her gaze darting around the studio filled with prints and lights. She didn't touch anything. She didn't ask questions. When I handed her a mop and said, "Start there," she nodded without hesitation and moved to the far corner. I returned to my desk, my hands steady as I picked up my editing tablet again. The rain eased outside, but inside the air was thick with something new. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the faintest shadow of change. The weeks that followed were strange, quieter than I expected after a storm that had torn my family's name to pieces. My YouTube video was still circulating, though the pace of comments had slowed, leaving behind a permanent scar in the digital record. Strangers still reached out, some with praise, some with judgment, but I didn't bother replying anymore. I had said what I needed to say, and the world had listened. Now it was time to build something else. Caroline kept showing up at the studio. At first, she came timidly, knocking like she did that first night, unsure if I'd let her in, but soon it became routine. She didn't dress like she used to. The designer gowns were gone, replaced with plain jeans, sweaters too big for her frame, her hair tied back without fuss. She rarely wore makeup. Her face was softer without the mask, but also older, weighed down by consequences she could no longer ignore. She mopped floors, cleaned counters, fetched coffee without complaint. I didn't pay her, and she never asked to be paid. It was as if she needed the work more than the money, as if scrubbing stains from my floor was the only way to scrub some of the guilt from her own hands. We barely spoke. She worked in silence, and I edited or printed in silence. Sometimes our eyes met, and she looked away quickly, ashamed. Other times, she lingered, watching me adjust the focus on my camera or frame a photograph. Once she whispered, almost to herself, "I never realized how much you saw." I didn't answer, but I heard the weight in her words. At night, after she left, I would stare at the photographs lined along the walls, faces of strangers, an old man with folded hands, a mother holding her child, a woman laughing on a park bench. They had all trusted me to see them as they were, not as the world wanted them to appear. I realized then that was the difference between Caroline and me. She had always been desperate to be seen, but only in the best light. I had always been content to see others as they truly were, even if it wasn't beautiful, especially if it wasn't. The gallery opening in Atlanta drew closer, and my days filled with preparation. Sylvia visited often, her notes sharp but encouraging. "You've started something important," she told me once, walking slowly past my prints. "People don't want perfection, they want truth, and you've given them that." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, letting the words settle somewhere deep inside me. On the night of the exhibition, the gallery buzzed with soft conversation, the clink of glasses, the hush of footsteps on polished wood. My photographs lined the walls, each one lit carefully, each one a moment I had captured when no one else was watching. Strangers paused in front of them, leaning closer, whispering, smiling faintly. Some even cried. No one asked about the scandal or my family's collapse. They only asked about the images, about the people in them, about me. Near the end of the night, as I stood in the corner watching it all, Sylvia approached with a glass of wine. "This is only the beginning," she said again, her eyes gleaming. For the first time, I believed her. For the first time, I wasn't a shadow, I was the story. Later that evening, as the gallery began to empty, I stepped outside to breathe. The Atlanta streets glowed with reflections of the city lights, wet pavement shimmering under the hum of passing taxis. For a moment, I let myself lean against the glass door, feeling the vibration of conversations still happening inside. My chest rose with a steady breath, calmer than I had felt in years. That was when I noticed her. Across the street, half hidden beneath the awning of a closed boutique, stood Vivienne, my mother. She wore no pearls this time, no satin gown, no entourage circling her like satellites. Just a dark coat, her chin tilted upward, her figure rigid as if pride was the only thing keeping her standing. She didn't wave, didn't call out, she only watched. For a long minute, we stayed like that, two women bound by blood, divided by everything else. The silence stretched across the wet street, heavier than words. I didn't move toward her, and she didn't move toward me. There were no apologies in her eyes, no cracks in her mask of control. But for the first time, she wasn't surrounded by people who believed her version of the story. She was alone, framed by rain and distance. I reached into my coat pocket, pulling out the small camera I carried everywhere. My hands moved instinctively, adjusting the focus, centering her in the frame. The lens caught her posture, her chin lifted stubbornly against the drizzle, her eyes sharp but unreadable. I pressed the shutter. One click, a moment captured. Later, when I uploaded the image, I didn't title it right away. It sat in my files, unnamed, just another photograph among hundreds. But as I studied it, the caption wrote itself. Sometimes, silence says, enough. I realized then that I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her approval. What I needed was exactly what I had, proof that I had survived her silence, and that now she was the one living inside it. Inside the gallery, my photographs hung under warm lights, strangers leaning closer to study the truths I had captured. Across the street, my mother stood outside in the rain, a woman no longer able to control the story. And me, I was no longer the quiet one. I was the voice, the witness, the artist. The shadow they had tried to erase had become the one thing they could never ignore. In the months that followed, the Kane family name dissolved faster than anyone thought possible. What had once been spoken with reverence in Savannah's social circles was now uttered with pity, sometimes even disgust. The scandal had stained every inch of their legacy, and no amount of denial could wash it clean. Invitations stopped arriving for Vivienne. The charity boards and garden clubs that once begged for her presence quietly erased her name from their rosters. She stayed home behind drawn curtains, her pearls gathering dust in their velvet box. For a woman who had built her life on appearances, invisibility was a harsher sentence than prison. Caroline's collapse was brutal and public. Modeling agencies cut ties overnight, endorsements vanished, and the few friends she clung to slipped away one by one. Online, she tried to maintain her facade, posting carefully staged photos as if nothing had changed, but the comments shredded her illusions, mockery, scorn, endless reminders of Ethan's name. Worse still, when she tried to reach Ethan, she found his number disconnected, his apartment empty, his accounts closed. The private savings she thought they shared had been drained. The man she betrayed her fiancé for had betrayed her in return, leaving her with nothing but debt and shame. Richard faced ruin in silence. Business partners backed out, citing instability. Old investors stopped taking his calls. His empire, built on deals and reputation, crumbled without a sound. He never lashed out, never demanded answers. He simply sat at the dining room table, night after night, staring into a glass of bourbon, his shoulders stooped. For decades, he had ignored the battles inside his family, too detached to intervene. Now, that detachment had left him powerless to stop the wreckage. And me? I kept moving forward. My YouTube video had reached millions, though the views weren't what mattered anymore. What mattered was the shift it had created in me. For the first time, people didn't look through me, they looked at me. Sylvia's exhibition opened doors I never thought possible. Other curators reached out, magazines wanted interviews, students asked to learn from me. My photographs, the ones I had hidden for years, were finally being seen for what they were, fragments of truth in a world obsessed with illusion. I didn't pretend the scars were gone. Some nights I still lay awake, hearing my mother's voice, replaying Caroline's laughter, remembering the sting of that dry piece of bread on my wedding table. But when I walked into my studio each morning, the light spilling across prints of strangers who had trusted me with their truths, I felt something stronger than bitterness. I felt free. The shadow they tried to bury had become the storyteller. And no one, not Vivienne, not Caroline, not Richard, could take that from me again. The first true proof that life had shifted came months later, at a small coffee shop in downtown Atlanta. I had slipped in early one morning, camera bag slung over my shoulder, planning to spend a few hours editing before heading to the gallery. As I waited for my order, a woman at the next table leaned toward me hesitantly. She looked mid-40s, dressed plainly, her hands wrapped tightly around a steaming cup. "Are you Marissa Kane?" she asked. For a moment, my chest clenched, expecting judgment, another stranger ready to accuse me of being cruel. But her eyes were soft. "Yes," I said cautiously. She exhaled, almost in relief. "I just wanted to thank you. What you did, speaking up like that, it made me realize I could too. My family always treated me like I was invisible, like I wasn't worth listening to. And when I saw your video, I thought, maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe the way they treat me isn't love, it's control." Her voice trembled, but she smiled faintly. "So I told them I'm done, I moved out. I'm starting over. and I wanted you to know your story mattered. I didn't know what to say. No one had ever thanked me for surviving before. I nodded, my throat tight. I'm glad it helped. I managed. She left soon after, but her words stayed with me. That moment was more powerful than every article, every headline. Because it meant my pain had become something more, it had become a mirror for others. Back at the gallery, the exhibition, Portraits of Truth, continued to draw crowds. Each photograph felt like a thread connecting me to strangers I'd never meet, people who saw themselves in the faces I had captured. A critic wrote that my work was unflinching but tender, and for the first time in my life, I believed someone was describing me as much as my art. At night, when the city quieted and my studio lights hummed, I sometimes thought of Caroline. She still came by now and then, cleaning quietly, never asking for more. We didn't speak much, but her presence no longer carried the sting it once did. She was a fallen star, trying to sweep the dust off the floor. Whether she would change for good, I didn't know. Forgiveness wasn't something I could force. But for once, her story wasn't mine to carry. And as for Vivienne, she remained silent. The queen of appearances had vanished from society, her reign ended not by scandal alone, but by truth she could no longer bend. Sometimes I wondered if she replayed that night in the ballroom, if she blamed me still, or if she finally saw the emptiness of what she had built. But whether she hated me or pitied me, it didn't matter anymore. For once, her silence didn't weigh on me. It freed me. Standing in my studio, surrounded by photographs of people who had trusted me with their faces, I realized the final twist of my story. Revenge wasn't what I had carried out that night. What I had done was liberation. And, not just mine, anyone who had ever been forced into silence could look at me and know. Shadows don't disappear. Sometimes they become the light. The gallery show ran for 6 weeks, and on the final night I stayed long after the last guest left, walking slowly from photograph to photograph. Each image glowed under its own pool of light, but together they told a story bigger than me. Faces that had been overlooked, moments too ordinary for anyone else to care about, truths that would have slipped away if I hadn't caught them. Standing there, I realized that in some strange way, the exhibit wasn't just about them, it was about me. For decades, I had been invisible in my own family, erased from photographs, written out of memories. Now, here I was, on walls strangers paid money to walk past, seen in a way the Kanes never allowed me to be. When the lights were finally dimmed and the doors locked, I stepped out into the cool night air. The city was quiet, the streets slick with mist, the neon signs flickering against puddles. For a moment, I thought about that wedding night, the chandeliers, the dry bread, the whispers that turned into gasps as phones lit up with my video. I had been terrified to press upload, convinced I would regret it. But now, looking at how far I'd come, I realized I had never made a clearer decision. The truth hadn't ruined me, it had rebuilt me. Back in Savannah, the Kanes had become a ghost story. People whispered about their fall at luncheons and book clubs, but no one invited them anymore. My mother was rarely seen in public, though every now and then someone sent me a blurry photo of her in the grocery store, unrecognizable without her pearls and hairdresser's touch. Caroline kept scrubbing floors in my studio, her pride gone, her voice quieter than it had ever been. And Richard, he shrank into silence, sipping bourbon at an empty table where deals were once made. Their empire wasn't taken from them. They handed it away, piece by piece, wrapped in lies they thought no one would ever see. I didn't need their apologies. I didn't need their acknowledgement. What I had was better, freedom. I was no longer waiting to be chosen. I had chosen myself. As I walked back to my apartment that night, the city lights reflected off wet pavement like 1,000 tiny mirrors. For once, I didn't look away from my reflection. I let it walk beside me, whole, steady, undeniable. They thought I would always stay quiet, sitting in the shadows, invisible at their perfect table. They thought the dry bread, the empty seat, the silence would keep me small forever. But the moment I pressed upload, everything changed. Their empire of lies collapsed in front of friends, strangers, and the world itself. Caroline lost her crown, Vivienne lost her throne, and Richard lost the business he valued more than his children. The Kane name, once untouchable, now lives as a warning of what happens when cruelty festers unchecked. But me, I found my voice. I turned years of erasure into a single truth that no one could deny. My story didn't just expose them, it freed me. And maybe it freed others too, the ones who saw my video and realized they weren't crazy, they weren't alone, they weren't powerless. This isn't just about revenge, it's about survival. It's about refusing to fade into the background when someone tells you that's all you deserve. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is tell the truth, and once it's out there, no one can silence it again. If you've ever been pushed aside, if you've ever been told you don't matter, remember this: shadows don't disappear, they become the light. Thank you for listening to this story. If you want to hear more jaw-dropping tales of betrayal, justice, and unexpected payback, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. And in the comments, tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place?